All right, you guys, welcome back to our class notes. So we have been talking about natural selection and this idea that natural selection in fact leads to evolution. And we've also discussed that natural selection is not random. If you guys can kind of rewind your memory back to when we talked about when we watched that short 10-minute video about the mice being different colors, the scientists on that video talk about natural selection not being random and how it happens because these animals are best suited for their environment. So today what we're going to talk about is a couple different ways that evolution can happen that are not related or linked to natural selection. And these different ways that we're going to talk about are in fact random events. So natural selection, not random, and then the rest of these are random. So before we get started, you guys want to take out a piece of paper. You can take out a piece of binder paper if you'd like, or you can take out a piece of white paper and you can kind of start to set up your paper this way if you want. And you can go ahead and pause the video and do that, or you can just take notes and do it as we move through them. But either way, it is up to you. And then you will need to have some colors. I'm going to use orange, yellow, green, and red, but you can use 4 different other colors. It doesn't really matter. These are just the colors I decided to use. All right, so let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and use the template that I've already created, or that I already have, I should say. And we are going to start by simply talking about natural selection really quickly, just to kind of refresh our memories. So natural selection, if you guys can remind yourselves or recall, is when a population of organisms adapting over time due to competition or environmental pressures. And remember, due to these environmental pressures, only the best that are suited to survive will survive. So we are going to say environmental pressures were those best suited survive. Okay. And again, I just want to make a note of this, right? Natural selection leads to evolution. And also natural selection is not random. It's very purposeful, right? If you are fit to survive, you survive. If you are not, then you don't. Okay, that's just by nature what happens. That's what natural selection is. So again, going back to this idea that natural selection is not random, but and it leads to evolution, but then there are all these other things that we know of that are random and happen by chance that can also lead to evolution. So the first one we're going to talk about is mutation, and mutation is the ultimate source of variation a change in DNA that affects traits. So biggest thing here is that it is a change in DNA, right, that affects traits, and this usually leads to a lot of genetic variation, and you guys know that, along with sexual reproduction, which we've discussed. So let's say, if you haven't already divided your paper, you might want to draw yourself a line here, because we're going to draw an example of a mutation happening here. So let's say we have an orange ladybug or beetle, whatever you want to call it. Okay, I'm gonna use black. Again, you don't have to use black. You can use your pencil. And let's say this ladybug reproduced and had another orange, right? And then they had, whoops, other ones, different colors. It's a lot of ladybugs, huh? Well, that's okay. It's just how the cookie crumbles. Great. So let's say we have a mutation, right? And so obviously if we have a mutation, we know that mutations create variation. Okay. Now, any mutation that is unfavorable is not going to be selected. And we know that through natural selection. So we're going to say unfavorable mutations selected against for, or are selected, sorry, against. Right? So we're going to show that by doing a little X. So let's just say we had this orange ladybug, and this orange ladybug had a couple mutations leading to some variation in color, like some red and green. And then second generation happens, but for some reason, that red mutation that the ladybug had is not very beneficial. So we're going to select against it, and we're going to continue to move on. So then in our next generation, we start to reproduce, and then we start to notice some more variation. So maybe now this green one, since it was mutated, maybe now it also has a green one, but maybe like a darker one, okay? So as reproduction continues to happen, so does mutations. Okay. So, okay, we have this generation where we have two variations of green, a yellow, and then more green. And then we continue to, oh, actually, you know what? I think this one was supposed to be yellow. Whoopsie daisy. Let's keep it yellow because we want to make sure that we also show that we have other mutations, not just variations happening. Sorry. It's hard to talk and write at the same time, you guys. I'm sorry. So, like I was saying, so we have more reproduction happening, maybe a couple more mutations occur. And again, we are going to see the same pattern where only the favorable mutations are more likely to survive. So let's write that down. Favorable mutations are more likely to survive. Okay, and then if they survive, then they're going to reproduce. And a lot of you are going to say, but isn't that what natural selection is? Yes, essentially natural selection, if you have favorable traits, then you survive. But how do you get those favorable traits? Well, through mutations, and that part is random. Having a mutation is the random part. Natural selection in itself, the process is not random. That's what I'm trying to explain here. So again, let's say we had another mutation here where we got yellows, and for some reason the yellow was also not favorable. These get killed off, and we only see a lot of the green. But then you notice that also all these are green, so maybe the orange one was also not favorable, right? Even though that's what we started with. So thank God for mutations. All right, so that is one example of how we can get to evolution in a random way. So let's also talk about this other very commonly known method or way, which is called genetic drift. Genetic drift is as a random change of trait occurrence. So random change of trait occurrence. Okay, and again, there are two examples of genetic drift. One of them being bottleneck and the other one being the founder effect. So I'm going to flip my paper. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk about that founder effect first. And we're actually missing founder effect here. Okay, so founder effect is when a new colony is started by a few members of the original population. So again, going back to our ladybugs, let's go ahead and draw a couple of them. I'm only going to draw, let's see, 10. So just make yourself 10 circles. And then let's make 3 here. And let's make 4 here. Or 5. Okay, so again, let's just say in this population, we have a bunch of orange ladybugs. And maybe we have, I don't know, 4 of them. Or 5. Why not? Let's just do half and half. And then the others are red. And let's say you have this population and something happens and these little buddies get out. They escape. And again, we're going to pick on the orange ones because why not? So these little orange buddies, they get out and they go to a new habitat. And in this new habitat, they start their own new colony. A new sort of neighborhood, if you will. Okay, so that's this idea of founder effect. They are the founders of this new sort of population, right? And so this is the original population. And then this is going to be that new one. Although same species still, they wandered around and wandered off. So that's this idea of a genetic drift, right? So now this new habitat, the reason why it's an example of genetic drift, is now this new habitat, they're only going to be reproducing orange offspring. Right? So we're seeing a drift or a change in their genes, as opposed to the original population, which is going to have some yellow and some orange, and then you never know, there might be a mutation as well. Okay, so that other example of genetic drift is called bottleneck, and bottleneck is when a population size is reduced for at least one generation. So let's write that down. Okay. So this usually happens not because some of the original population people wander off, but because there's some sort of natural disaster or disruption. And so natural disasters can happen. Or other disruptions can be caused usually by humans. Okay, so when we say natural disasters, we're talking about like earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, anything crazy that happens in nature. And just for funsies, I'm going to go ahead and draw my volcano here. Spewing lava. Okay, and remember, like I said, it could be earthquakes. It could be volcanic eruptions. Or other natural disasters, right? With humans, a lot of the disruptions associated with humans are usually like, let's see, hunting, right? When we hunt for specific animals. Pollution is another big one. Deforestation. And usually deforestation is also related to habitat loss, but that is not the only cause of habitat loss, right? We can cause habitat loss in many different ways, but this is one big one. So these are some of the things that humans can do to cause disruption in a habitat, or then we also have natural disasters which can occur to cause those disruptions. So let's look at an example of how either one of these would affect or lead to bottleneck. So let's say this time, let's use a couple different colors. So let's say we have in our first generation, so I'm going to say generation 1 before I start coloring. And I'm just going to abbreviate to that. I'm going to say generation 2. And then this is going to be generation 3 and my generation 4. Okay, so let's say in my original population, I have something that looks like this in terms, we're going to pretend that these are genes, okay? We're going to say we have 4 green genes and 4 red genes. Okay, but then something happens, something like a natural disaster or a human thing. And what we'll see is that in the second generation, we only have 3 of these genes, and green is still going strong. Okay. And then we start to really see over more generations a decrease in the variation of genes. So that's when we really start to notice the bottleneck effect. And so we're going to write here bottleneck. Okay. And what you're going to see is that now maybe we only have 1 red gene, but again, we still have a lot of those green genes. And eventually, by the time that we get to another generation, that gene is completely gone. And all you see is these genes. And so this is the final population. And I'm going to abbreviate population to POP. And so this would be, before the final population, this would be the surviving population. So let's say this is our surviving population after whatever happened. And so they're going to start mating, but for some reason, this gene is just not doing it, right? So we get to this bottleneck effect, right? If you had a bottle and you move up the bottle, it gets thinner and thinner. And that's kind of what this is referring to, is like you're thinning out the amount of genes or variations that you have in a population. And that's how we kind of demonstrate it. So again, this can happen either through natural disasters or human activity. And again, this is random, right? This isn't like something you plan and you're like, okay, let me go cut down all the trees and cause some bottleneck effect. It's more of a random thing. And again, sorry, I keep saying it again. And the founder effect is also random, and mutations are also random. Okay, so far this is what you have. And the last thing we're going to look at is called gene flow. So I'm going to give you guys, you should give yourselves a second and pause the video if you are not caught up. And again, remember, don't worry about coloring anything in yet. If you are backed up, you can always pause and go back, or, you know, do whatever you need to do. All right, so gene flow is another one of those random events that leads to evolution. And the way we're going to define gene flow is as the movement of individuals into or out of a population. So that's why it's called a flow, right? You're flowing either in or out of a population. So let's say you had a population here and a population here. And in this population, we are going to go with, let's see, we've already used our orange ladybugs and our green and our red, but pick the two colors that you want to use. You can keep using the same ones, it doesn't matter. I am just going to use red because I have it handy here. Okay, so let's say you had these really cool red ladybugs, and then suddenly that one of them moved over to a different population. And in this population, you had different kinds of ladybugs. That's pretty cool. Okay. So you have a friend here from this population that decided they were going to wander off, and damn, then they found themselves in a new place. And that is really what gene flow is, right? It's the movement of individuals in and or out of a population. And so this could go either way, but by mixing up populations and doing this also creates some variation and eventually can lead to evolution, right? As long as whatever is happening is beneficial. So all of these things can be tied back to natural selection, but the idea is that these parts are the random parts of evolution, whereas natural selection, that process in itself is not random, okay? So I hope this made sense. I would like for you guys to go back with a highlighter and make sure you highlight all of these key ideas that we talked about today. I like to use different colors for each, so that's what I'm going to do.